Studies Section 5, The Metaphysics of René Descartes. Introduction. In this section, attention shall be directed at examining the metaphysics of René Descartes. Of course, Descartes is easily one of the major thinkers in epistemology in the modern period. It is indeed easy to regard him as the father of modern philosophy. However, he had things to say about some metaphysical notions such as the mind, the world, and God, all which he derived from the existence of the self. In this regard, he places the self in the ontological spectrum of relations before God, who is discovered because the self exists. And finally, he presents a systematic idealism combined with logic, mathematics, and rationalism to produce a robust philosophy for the modern time. In this study section, you will learn the metaphysics that underlies the philosophy of Descartes and also its explanation on the dualistic conception of the human person. Learning outcomes for study section 5. When you have studied this section, you should be able to discuss the metaphysics that underlies the philosophy of Descartes, explain Descartes' dualistic conception of the human person. The metaphysics of René Descartes. Descartes' metaphysics can at best be squeezed out of his epistemological stone. This is so because throughout his meditations, he focused on his epistemological project of foundationalism, certainty, and deductive reasoning. However, he had a considerable discourse concerning the nature of the mind, God, and the world. All these are easily linked to his conception of substance. For Descartes, the mind is a substance whose ontological status is that of an unextended, invisible, indestructible type. Yet, for Descartes, this rather mysterious substance influences or imparts upon the human body carrying it. To this extent, the mind, which is perhaps best regarded as an immaterial matter or a non-substantial substance, easily introduces into the Cartesian metaphysics an intractable difficulty. For how can a substance be regarded as truly a substance when it has no place for extension or individuation? The meditations, which Descartes is said to have begun around 1639, consist of the presentation of Descartes' metaphysical system in its most detailed level and in the expanding of Descartes' philosophical system, which he first introduced in the fourth part of his Discourse on Method, 1637. Descartes' Meditations. The Meditations is made up of 6 meditations, in which Descartes first discards all belief in a thing which are not absolutely certain, and then tries to establish what can be known for sure. The meditations were written as if he, Descartes in bracket, were meditating for 6 days. Each meditation refers to the last one as yesterday. Descartes' metaphysical thought is also found in the Principles of Philosophy, 1644, which the author intended to be a philosophy guidebook. Descartes is often regarded as the first thinker to emphasize the use of reason to develop the natural science. For him, philosophy was a thinking system that embodied all knowledge. That is, all philosophy is like a tree of which metaphysics is the root, physics the trunk, and all the other sciences the branches that grow out of this trunk, which are reduced to 3 principal areas, namely medicine, mechanics, and ethics. For Descartes, The science of morals represents the highest and most perfect pursuit, which, presupposing an entire knowledge of the other sciences, is the last degree of wisdom. In his discourse on method, he attempts to arrive at a fundamental set of principles that one can know as true without any doubt. To achieve this, he employs a method called hyperbolical / metaphysical doubt, also sometimes referred to as methodological skepticism. He rejects any ideas that can be doubted and then reestablishes them in order to acquire a firm foundation for genuine knowledge. Initially, Descartes arrives at only a single principle, which is that thought exists. Thought cannot be separated from me, therefore I exist. Discourse on the method and principles of philosophy. Most famously, this is known as cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Therefore, Descartes concluded, if he doubted, then something or someone must be doing the doubting. As such, the very fact that he doubted proved his existence. The simple meaning of the phrase is that if one is skeptical of existence, that in and of itself proves that he does exist. Descartes concludes that he can be certain that he exists because he thinks. But in what form does this take place? He perceives his body through the use of the senses. So Descartes determines that the only indubitable knowledge is that he is a thinking thing. Thinking is what he does, and his power must come from his essence. Descartes defines thought, cogitato, as what happens in me, such that I am immediately conscious of it, insofar as I am conscious of it. Thinking is thus every activity of a person of which he is immediately conscious. By this rendition, Descartes presents the human person as the I or the ego that lives because the ego thinks. In this respect, Descartes derives the cogito's reality from its functionality. Descartes goes further to derive the external world and the supreme being, God in bracket, from the fundamentals of the cogito. To this effect, the reality of the self or the existence of the self is not derived from the existence of God. Rather, the reality of God and the world around us, as well as the bodies that you carry around, are approved of their existence in the light of the ego. This is a rather theologically or metaphysically unique representation of reality. Descartes, therefore, is only able to attempt a systematic discourse of the mind-body interaction from certain given assumption of the ontological status of the mind. To further demonstrate the limitations of the senses, Descartes proceeds with what is known as the wax argument. In the development of the argument where he considers a piece of wax, his senses inform him that it has certain characteristics such as shape, texture, size, color, smell, and so forth. When he brings the wax towards a flame, these characteristics change completely. However, it seems that it is still the same thing. It is still the same piece of wax, even though the data of the senses inform him that all of its characteristics are different. Therefore, in order to properly grasp the nature of the wax, he should put aside the senses. He must use his mind. And so, Descartes concludes that something that he must grasp solely by the faculty of judgment, which is the mind, that which he thought he was seeing. In this manner, Descartes proceeds to construct a system of knowledge, discarding perception as unreliable and instead admitting only deduction as a method. In the third and fifth meditation, he offers an ontological proof of a benevolent God, On the basis that God is benevolent, Descartes says he can have some faith in the account of reality his senses provide him, for God has provided him with a working mind and sensory system and does not desire to deceive him. From this supposition, however, he finally establishes the possibility of acquiring knowledge about the world based on deduction and perception. In terms of epistemology, therefore, Descartes can be said to have contributed such ideas as a rigorous conception of foundationalism and the possibility that reason is the only reliable method of attaining knowledge. He nevertheless was very much aware that experimentation was necessary in order to verify and validate theories. Descartes also wrote his response to skepticism about the existence of the external world. He argues that sensory perceptions come to him involuntarily and are not willed by him. They are external to his senses, and according to Descartes, this is evidence of the existence of something outside of his mind and thus an external world. Descartes goes on to show that things in the external world have a material nature by arguing that God would not deceive him as to the ideas that are being transmitted, and that God has given him the propensity to believe that such ideas are caused by material things. Why did Descartes call himself a thinking thing? He believed he exists because he thinks. Dualistic conception of the human person. Descartes, in his Passions of the Soul and the Destruction of the Human Body, suggested that the body works like a machine, that it has material properties. The mind, or soul in bracket, on the other hand, was described as non-material and does not follow the laws of nature. Descartes argued that the mind interacts with the body at the pineal gland. This form of dualism or duality proposes that the mind controls the body and that the body can also influence the otherwise rational mind, such as when people act out of passion. Most of the previous accounts of the relationship between mind and body had been unidirectional. Descartes suggested that the pineal gland is the seat of the soul for several reasons. First, the soul is unitary, and unlike many areas of the brain, the pineal gland appeared to be unitary, though subsequent microscopic inspection has revealed it is formed of two hemispheres. Second, Descartes observed that the pineal gland was located near the ventricles. He believed the cerebrospinal fluid of the ventricles acted through the nerves to control the body, and that the pineal gland influenced this process. Cartesian dualism set the agenda for philosophical discussion of the mind-body problem for many years after Descartes' death. According to Descartes, does the mind follow the laws of nature? No, because it is non-material. Summary of Study Section 5. In Study Section 5, you have learned that 1. Although René Descartes was most prominent in epistemology, his philosophical inquiry still left behind a considerable chance for discussing the connection between epistemology and metaphysics. 2. Certain issues characterize Cartesian metaphysics, such as the notions of God, the mind, the self, and the world. The ontological basis for all these notions are examined and are to be articulated if you are to gain a considerable understanding of his epistemology. This is the end of Study Section 5. Thanks for listening.